I loved going out and being able to support Ari, in the climax of this story of this essentially stolen storytelling show that was taken away from him that definitely shouldn't have been. So to be able to go support the other side of that and just, the ideology behind, sticking to your guns, supporting your art, standing behind your word, all that good stuff. I definitely appreciate the opportunity to being able to do so. What's up, folks? What's going on? Welcome to the Spun Today Podcast, the only podcast that is anchored in writing, but unlimited in scope. I'm your host, Tony Ortiz, and I appreciate you listening. This is episode 285 of the Spun Today Podcast, and in this episode, I am going to speak about Andrew Schulz's latest comedy special, Life, as well as writing insights that I took away for myself that I wanted to share with my fellow writers and creatives out there. I'm also going to speak about going to Ari Shaffir's final storytelling show a couple of months ago. I'm going to share who I will be voting for New York City mayor and why. And last but certainly not least, your favorite segment and mine, another addition to the GOATs Doing GOAT Shit list. But first, before we get into all that good stuff, I wanted to tell you guys about 2 quick ways you can help support this show if you so choose. Your support means a ton. It helps keep the proverbial lights on here at Spun Today Studios, and it definitely goes a long way. The first way is checking out the new Spun Today Fourth Wall shop. Go to spuntoday.com and click on the shop menu up at the top right. And aside from cool redesigned hoodies and t-shirts, you will find the official Spun Today writing notebook for my fellow writers and creatives out there, and the redesigned Spun Today coffee mug in many different shades and colors, with the sign-off phrase to each episode, which is start taking steps in the general direction of your dreams. Again, go to spuntoday.com and click on the shop link in the top menu section. The second way you can help support this show if you so choose, I'm going to drop in right here, and then we will jump right into the episode. The Spun Today newsletter is available to each and every one of my listeners absolutely for free. All you have to do is go to spuntoday.com/subscribe and drop in your email address. What I'm going to do is brighten up everybody's least favorite day of the week by delivering 5 curated things within my weekly newsletter every Monday at noon. You're going to receive a photo of the week, a recommended podcast of the week. I listen to tons of podcasts from an array of varied interests. I cherry pick the very best ones so that you can check them out. I also share a video of the week, which can be anything from a tasty recipe to a dope rap battle to an enlightening TED Talk. I also share a quote of the week, and finally, for my fellow wordsmiths out there, a word of the week, so that you can step up your vocab. Again, this curated list is yours absolutely free by going to spuntoday.com/subscribe and dropping in your email address, and you can unsubscribe at any time. Again, go to spuntoday.com/subscribe, drop in your email address, and you'll get the very next one. Straight off of the Life tour, Andrew Schulz's latest comedy special is titled Life. Andrew Schulz is a great stand-up comedian and podcaster out of New York. He's the co-host of both the Flagrant podcast and Brilliant Idiots with Charlemagne the God. He's also credited with the current promotional approach of stand-up comics to leverage YouTube for putting out bits and full-length comedy specials. The idea being to get the attention of fans, even if it's by giving away content for free, and establishing your fan base and ultimately what their world is about, which is eyeballs. Getting eyeballs on your content and using all those avenues to drive purchases to your hard ticket live shows, and also as leverage at the negotiating table for your future comedy specials and additional content, all without the need of the network gatekeeper approval. He's gone from viral YouTube clips to major global world tours, including selling out Madison Square Garden within 90 minutes. That's within an hour and a half of it being announced, sold out. And with so much demand that he had to add a second show. This latest stand-up comedy special, Life, came out on Netflix on March 4th, 2025. In this special, his storytelling abilities and comedic chops were at the forefront, where he transforms the deeply personal experience of trying to have a kid with his wife, which ultimately led him and her down the IVF route, into a hilarious and relatable comedy special. So absolute shout out to Andrew Schulz for putting this together. I wanted to speak to for the production and presentation of the special. The special was filmed at the Beacon Theater in New York, and there's actually this whole drama behind that, which he spoke to on Flagrant. If you're a podcast fan, you'll know it, but for the uninitiated, I'll give a bit of a background too. He had another theater locked in and ready to shoot a special, a theater in Brooklyn, which he didn't name, which I thought was classy in terms of, taking the higher ground and not shitting on them too much. And also probably wise from a legal perspective and, maybe getting sued for defamation down the line or something like that. But he had this theater locked in Brooklyn, and with a couple weeks to go to shoot the special. So, they did the walkthroughs of this theater, sound checks and, contract signed, good to go, literally within a couple weeks, 2 weeks. And this was around Thanksgiving of last year, if I remember correctly, because it was going to be that Thanksgiving weekend. I think the filming was going to be on Black Friday, or maybe that Saturday, but it was definitely that holiday weekend. After Schultz had Donald Trump on his podcast, with again a couple weeks to go before shooting the already locked in, sold out shows at this theater for his special, the theater reached out to him and his business manager and canceled the taping. They said that they couldn't honor their agreement and would no longer be allowing him to shoot his special there. And look, I think Trump is a vile human being who cares so deeply about himself and himself alone that will go against anyone or anything that he's ever said, as long as it serves some sort of self-interest in the moment, including his main campaign promise of getting us out of wars and not starting any new wars, which he definitely hasn't gotten us out of any new ones, and is very much so about to get us into another, or at the very least supporting and egging it on to continue and escalate. But where I think my friends on the left get it wrong, as much so as my friends on the right, which is very much so rooted in what that Brooklyn theater decided to do, backing out of the venue booking agreement that they had with Schultz, is that speaking to someone from the other side isn't a crime. We're supposed to speak to folks from the other side. How else will you win them over? How else will you spread your ideas? How else will you check your own thoughts and ideologies by allowing other opposite thoughts and ideologies into your world to wrestle against them and actually objectively consider them? That whole idea of, if you quote unquote platform someone from the other side, you're just as bad or you're a Nazi, is such a fucking joke. The folks on the left that think that literally equal the folks on the right that think that. The folks on the extreme right say, you call the folks on the extreme left Nazis, and the folks on the extreme left call the folks on the extreme right Nazis. It's like, you guys are the fucking Nazis. You extreme fucks, you guys are the problem. But I digress. Thankfully though, with 2, maybe 3 weeks tops to go on a holiday weekend, the Beacon Theater in New York, which I've been to several times, stepped up to the plate and we're like, yo, you can shoot your special here if you want, which Schultz did, and it was amazing. So shout out to the Beacon Theater for standing up for just playing their position. You're a theater, you're a venue. You're in the business of renting out your venue for whatever artistic expressions or reasons that your theater is rented out for. You're not supposed to be some sort of manifestation of a political statement. But anyway, on a lighter note, and speaking to the production and presentation of the special, I wanted to speak about the promo with Matt motherfucking Damon. Matt, A-list celebrity, superstar Damon, which was a great marketing tool for the special and such a huge get. And the guys on the Flagrant Pod broke it down. Schultz had them, like the other guys that are part of the podcast, like Dove and Mark, as extras in this promo. And they broke down how it came to be. And apparently Schultz has met Matt Damon enough times that they're friendly. They're not friends, but they're friendly and have each other's numbers. And he said that, he worked on this text to Matt Damon because they had this idea to see if Matt Damon would cut a promo for the special. This grandiose idea. And he was like that he worked on the text for like an hour or two and pretty much gave Matt Damon every out possible in the initial text and saying, this is kind of a dumb idea, but just putting it out there. I definitely understand. I'm pretty sure you can't do it. It's not going to work around your schedule, this, that, and the other. And pretty much asked him if he could do a promo for his special. And the idea essentially was that, in everything that Matt Damon is in, he plays the hero and everybody loves him and he's this affable person. And they were, what if we cut the promo of you but being more of a dick, of a villain kind of. And he pretty much sends this text to Matt and is expecting him to say, either not respond or just say, of course not. And Matt responds, apparently, according to Schultz, nonchalantly, he's like, yeah, sure. Can you do it on a Tuesday though? Because I don't have anything going on next Tuesday, but can you do it between the hours of 9 and 2? Because I got to take the kids to school and then pick them up at 2. So if we can do it within that time, I'll be there. And Schultz was kind of like, of course, and moved everything around to fit that schedule and shot a really epic, really funny promo. Probably the best promo I've seen for a comedy special, honestly. And, might be biased because I'm a Matt Damon fan, but who isn't, right? If for whatever reason you don't want to see the Schultz special, which I obviously think you should, at the very least, watch this promo, which is hilarious in and of itself. It's 2 or 3 minutes long, and they break the fourth wall at the end and both start cracking up, and it's just completely worth a watch. So definitely check that out. Then in continuing here with a couple points more of related to production and presentation, his father introduces him on stage, which is definitely an emotional touch. Just being his pops first and foremost. What a proud moment to be able to do something where you can give that moment to your father and vice versa. But also knowing the background with his father having dementia, which my father does as well. But before that progresses, being able to give him that moment while he still can is priceless. It was definitely cool to see. Now the stage visual, the setup was pretty cool. There was this background screen that you don't even notice until he actually uses it, and it comes into play later on in the special. But it was blended into the actual curtains the whole time, which created this subtle yet immersive look, which I thought was pretty dope. And I forget where he mentioned this, but there was a surround sound mixing of the special or something like that, where the actual crowd audio was placed throughout the sound field, which makes listeners at home feel more present. It must have been either on Flagrant or maybe on Brilliant Idiots or on some other pod, but that was a bit meta for me in terms of within the comedy special sound mixing world. But still a cool takeaway to know that they go that deep into the weeds, into the details of what it is that they put out. It just shows how much they care about their craft. And a writing takeaway writing insight rather, that I took away from that. And it's not a direct application of those things that I can think of or link to writing prose, for example, but it is absolutely worth noting that in a more visual medium or even an audio medium, so like stand-up or podcasting, for example, production design and attention to that and sound mixing absolutely enhance the audience connection and emotional tone of what it is that you're putting out. Now let's talk about the vulnerability and honesty of this special. So Schultz digs into his IVF journey with openness and humor, turning something emotionally fraught into an experience the audience can laugh and empathize with. And he does this masterfully. He takes you from beginning to end of how they try to get pregnant naturally at first, and that didn't work. Then they wound up doing testing after trying for a long time, both of his wife's ovaries and eggs, and also on his side, his sperm. And up until this point, he's assuming that whatever the issue is it's on her side, which is an, ignorant guy thing to do that I'm sure we can all relate to. And then this is where we find out that the issue is actually with Andrew. And he finds out that he has lazy swimmers due to taking the hair pill finasteride for like over a decade. And he has this really funny bit where he's telling the doctor that they're marketing this pill completely wrong, that they shouldn't market it as a hair loss drug. He's like, you're telling me you can have sex with as many women as would let you without needing to use a condom, and you can never get them pregnant, and that the side effect is that you'll have beautiful, luscious hair? you guys should market this shit as the limitless pill. And going through all this testing, he also has bits about the humbling experience of going through the sperm testing and collection process. And he's like, a sperm in a cup looks a lot less than sperm on the back. He was like that he could have fit his entire sample in like a contact lens case, which I thought was a funny ass line. So then after finding this out, they wind up trying IUI, which is intrauterine insemination. That also does not work. And then ultimately trying IVF, which is the last resort and is known as the in vitro fertilization. And he takes us, again, in a funny way, but also heartfelt way through that whole experience, and how it was having to inject his wife with estrogen and progesterone hormones every morning as well as every night. And he has this funny line where he's like, and what do you guys think happened to her demeanor after a few weeks of injecting her with more woman juice? Do you think she became more rational? Oh, and I think earlier on, he also said something else to the effect of that the entire process is like super hard for the woman, physically and emotionally, and it's very expensive for the man. And I don't think we speak about that enough. And just a writing insight that I take away from the vulnerability and honesty here is that vulnerability humanizes comedians and writers, and sharing authentic struggle lets the humor land deeper and fosters a connection with the audience. I'd say just as much as within stand-up comedy as it would within writing prose. I also wanted to speak about a little bit the cultural commentary through jokes within his special. And a big thing that Schultz is known for is that everyone can get these jokes, as he says. Different cultures, religions, sexes, whatever your sexual preference is, etc. And he did not disappoint on that front in this special. There's this recurring character, he calls him the Italian meatball nurse guy, that shows up throughout the special. And he does that, stereotypical Italian accent for him, which is hilarious, along with a couple of super funny bits. He has a Puerto Rican baby joke where he says, how because he's speaking to when the baby first comes out, how it's a lot darker than the skin tone that they ultimately take on. And he's like, how all frogs are born tadpoles? All babies are born Puerto Rican. And they make them white by heating them up under a 7-Eleven taquito lamp. Just hilarious. Then he has Muslims always trying to out-Jew the Jews. And he speaks to, I forget how he worked this in, but he has this piece where he highlights religious one-upsmanship. He's taking on the persona of a Muslim, and he's saying, like, they fast for one day? Fine, we'll fast for the whole month. And then he's like, how many times a day do they pray? Fine, we'll pray 5 times a day. And then he's like, oh, they only circumcise the boys? Alluding to female circumcision and stuff like that. That was a masterclass in letting the audience fill that piece in. But a writing insight that I took away from that is how Schultz skillfully balances edgy cultural commentary with charm and self-awareness. Most importantly, showing how comedians, and I would argue writers, can navigate sensitive topics with wit. And I think we can take away from that as writers, doing the same thing in prose, being confident and brave with our perspectives, but sharing them in a thoughtful way, not losing sight of that part. Now let's speak to the structuring and storytelling of the special. The narrative structure subtly takes us through Schultz's journey, from fertility challenges to supporting his wife, to the fear of miscarriage, to acceptance and resilience, and ultimately a happy ending. And there's this heart-wrenching moment related to the fear of a miscarriage, which definitely caught me off guard. It got me fucking emotional. Then I made my wife watch the special, and she was fucking bawling as well. And it's this moment where after they finally get pregnant, his wife wakes up in the middle of the night. She had a nightmare saying that she thought that she lost the baby, or she had a dream rather, a nightmare, where she did lose the baby. And she woke up, she went to the bathroom, then she starts screaming from the bathroom, and there's blood everywhere. And this is, after the whole journey of, trying naturally, then trying IUI, then trying IVF, finally getting pregnant, and then while being pregnant, thinking that you lost a baby, because obviously that's what you're going to think, right? You have a horrible dream about a miscarriage, you're having stomach pains, you have blood. That's the logical conclusion. And the climactic moment of this part of the story's arc was that they get to the hospital, they start checking his wife and the baby, and on the baby rather. And while that's going on, Schultz said that he apologizes to his wife. And he says to her that this is his problem, and his problem has caused in her the most difficult time in her life, and that he can't protect her from it. And that he's really sorry about that. And she says to him, "You don't have problems anymore. We have problems, and we'll figure this out together." And that was just a beautiful, emotional beat within this stand-up special that perfectly segues into a video compilation. This is where that screen, that again, you don't know is a screen up until this point, really. I think there was, actually, he did show the screen once before, but he shows this montage of videos of this entire experience that he's speaking about, going through all the injections and finding out that they're pregnant, and then this scary checkup in the hospital after thinking they have a miscarriage. Again, bringing the audience in to this very emotional moment with them, and then hearing the baby's heartbeat together. And it was such an emotional sigh of relief. And then the baby being born, etc., etc. And the writing insight that I take away from that is that structuring comedy with emotional arcs can elevate that comedic set beyond laughs into something memorable and affecting. And from a writing perspective, I'll take it a step further with not just balancing humor with vulnerability, but doing so vice versa, and also with other inverse themes or tones, such that they coexist and each sharpens the other, which will create a more resonant and layered storytelling experience. On a point of personal reflection, I know a couple of people that have gone through IVF, one successfully and one not, and that can definitely take a toll on people and their relationships. It's such an emotionally and obviously physically all-encompassing thing. And I thought that Schultz's ability to turn a difficult chapter into accessible, resonant comedy is inspiring. Obviously for people going through something similar, but also for me as a writer and as a creative. Great stand-up comedy often lives in the tension between laughter and heart, and Schultz masters that balance here with this special. And a writing insight that I definitely take away from that is don't be afraid to mind the hard parts of your life for your writing. That's likely where the deepest connections can happen. To my listeners out there, what personal story could you tell through humor? To my fellow writers out there, definitely consider exploring vulnerability in your work. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, definitely check out Andrew Schultz's latest comedy special, Life, streaming now on Netflix, as well as Schultz's other content, like his other specials, the Brilliant Idiots podcast, and Flagrant Pods, which I will definitely link to in the episode notes for you fine folks to check out. Going to see Ari Shaffir's final storytelling show. Ari Shaffir, who is an awesome stand-up comic. I always say he's my favorite. He's the way I hear folks describe, knowing an indie band that nobody really knows about, and then they blow up and go mainstream, and then everybody thinks they're awesome, but you're like, I knew them first before it was cool. That's how I feel about Ari Shaffir. I've mentioned a bunch in the past that the very first show, I actually wrote a piece about this somewhere on my website, spuntoday.com/free writing. The very first podcast that I listened to, or Rogan podcast that I listened to, which was like the second or third podcast ever that I listened to, was a super early single or double digit episode number of a show when not many people were listening, not many people knew what the hell a podcast was, and it was Ari Shaffir on Rogan. And I instantly became a fan of both, and is where I, fell in love with podcasting all those years ago. And have since obviously followed his stand-up career. His special Jew, I thought was a work of art, which I did a breakdown for. definitely his best piece of work, in my opinion, by far. I also credit him with kind of bridging the gap between West Coast and East Coast comics and podcasters when he decided to move from the LA comedy scene, where he's a staple, obviously, and within, quote unquote, the Rogan sphere, and just moved to New York, which at the time was like, what? Ari Shaffir, he's moving to New York? What kind of crazy? And now it's like, he lives this nomadic experience where he'll go to Ecuador for like 3 or 4 months and live there. So it doesn't even seem like a big deal now. But when he initially did that, he was just an LA comic and, like big in the podcast scene over there, and had the Skeptic Tank podcast, eventually, so on and so forth. And then he became cool with the New York comedy scene and accepted there, and kind of bridged the gap where there wasn't I guess I would say like a East Coast, West Coast beef, like hip hop back in the day, like with Biggie and Tupac and shit. But it was that kind of vibe, but like a lighter version. And it was like factions of comedy, which probably still exist, and of podcasting as well, but to a much less degree now, if at all. The East Coast comics always, doing the West Coast comics pods and vice versa. And it's cool. It's dope to see. And I definitely attribute that to Ari Shaffir. But anyway, he has this show that he started way back in the day at the Comedy Store, where, comedians will have a show that they put on, and, they can format it however they want. Like Kill Tony started this way, for example. And he had this idea for this storytelling show where comedians would go on to tell one story that doesn't have to be funny or, filled with bits or anything like that. Although they often are, because they're comics telling these stories. But the idea behind the show, or the premise behind the show, is tell one story, one true story of something that happened to you once upon a time, whenever. And it started out as this show that he had at the Comedy Store that he would do on an idle day during the week when the club was dead, and would have a handful of people in the audience. And he grew it and kept doing it and tweaking it. And it eventually grew and got him a deal to put that show that he created on Comedy Central, a major network at the time. He's obviously much more known in the comedy scene now, growing in popularity, has specials out, has his show going on, just got this deal with Comedy Central. He's a recurring guest on Rogan. He has his own podcast, The Skeptic Tank, which was a great podcast. I format when I do interviews with folks, I format it around how he formatted his, which was taking a deep dive into that person's, thing, whatever it is that they do, or a specific topic with that person, which obviously deviates in, being true to open form podcast, but the main through line is usually a singular subject. And so it was time to put out a comedy special that he had put together. I think it was his double special. And, he has this deal with Comedy Central, shopped it with them. I guess they assumed that he would do his special there. But he also saw what Netflix wanted to offer, and they offered him more in terms of not just financially, but also in terms of eyeballs. His thought process, the way he's explained it over the years, is that, he has his show on Comedy Central, and, Netflix gives him an opportunity to get even more eyeballs. Netflix is the big player in the comedy arena at the time, and probably still, although it seems to be spreading out a bit more with the Hulu specials and the Prime specials, HBO, the YouTube specials, so on and so forth. And, he's not locked into a 360 deal or some shit like that with Comedy Central, so it's an obvious move, right? But then Comedy Central got pissed and told him, essentially, allegedly, according to him, which I believe based on how everything actually played out, and the fact that all those executives that made those decisions at the time are no longer with Comedy Central, and that Comedy Central barely even exists anymore as a fucking organization, aside from South Park. But they leveraged his storytelling show against him and said, if you don't do your special here with us, for the less money, by the way, then we're going to cancel your show, your storytelling show. And at this point, there's definitely one season or maybe even 2 or 3 already that they've done, and it's a network show. So there's a bunch of jobs and friends of his that he got jobs for that involved with producing it, and his friends that were on this show, telling their stories, and then blowing up as a result. Like, for example, Ali Siddiq, who's a brilliant storytelling comedian in his own right, and obviously huge before that. But like me, I didn't know about him before seeing him on Ari's show and hearing the Mexicans got on boot story, which was definitely viral. So it was helping people's careers. But Ari is an artist's artist. He'll take the hit. He'll take the lumps. He'll stick to his guns for his art. He's always been that. And it's probably the thing I've respected most about him. He's always had that level of integrity. And he just doesn't speak about it. He bees about it, for lack of a better word. And this was one of those moments where it was like, are you going to cave? Like most folks would. But he didn't. But he also didn't do it in a way where he fucked everybody else that now had these jobs and opportunities based on something that he created. The show that he created, not the situation that he created, because those execs at Comedy Central, which tried fucking him over, are the ones that created this fucked up situation. And he wound up trying to take out loans to see if he can fund the show himself, like if they canceled it, and just keep everything going with the same production team, so on and so forth. But ultimately he couldn't. And they were like, I don't know if they were actual lawsuits or just threats of litigation going on with who owned the name, and ultimately they owned the name because he signed to that in his deal. So what he ultimately decided to do was walk away from his own show that he created so that the show can continue on, which it did for at least another season or two, with the other comedians which hosted it, which were, again, friends of Ari's, that also told him, because he has integrity within this space, yo, they hit me up with this opportunity. I don't want to do it. I know it's your show. I know what's going on. But he told them, no, definitely do it. You'd be great at it. And I want the show to go on. I want those people to continue having their jobs. What a fucking mensch, right? And good on him for sticking to his guns. But I definitely want to highlight that they were able to take the show away from him ultimately, which is why, in my opinion, if you don't own and have creative control of your IP, which I always harp on, I can't think of a deal where that makes sense. To each their own, and, lesson learned. But also, I don't know what was involved. I say that now as not having a deal on the table to own my IP for something that I wrote. But who knows how I'd react if some network offers me $1 million or $500,000 or whatever to create a series out of one of my books or short stories or a movie or whatever. I'd like to think that I would maintain my thought process, my level of integrity, and only say yes if it includes me having the creative control. But who knows? Maybe it'll be like some story that I forgot about from fucking 8 years ago that I wrote, and I'm like, oh, you want to buy that? Yeah, sure. You take the ownership, whatever. I don't think so, honestly. But I don't know. I don't know what the situation would be. I like to think that, if somebody offers you $500,000 to have creative ownership, they'll offer you $200,000 and not take the creative ownership, or whatever, however the math breaks down, which is what I would think that I would advocate for or push for. But I digress. Moving on then from that situation, Ari continued the format of the show that he created, but in live form. And he named it the Renamed Storytelling Show. And this is the show that I went to go see. He announced he was going to do it one more time and film it. So it was a final run of it and a recorded event that he mentioned on his podcast. And that he'd be releasing it in the future behind some sort of paywall, like Louis C.K. style, which I definitely can't wait to check out. So I copped tickets. Me and my wife went, and he actually mentioned on the podcast he wanted it to be, I think it was like that special that Sebastian did once, where it was like a MetLife gala type of, black tie event type of thing. He mentioned on the pod that he wanted folks to like dress up for it. So I was on the fence if I should or if I shouldn't. And I was literally gonna go, full suit, tie, and then I was like, nah, let me balance it a little bit. And I wound up going with jeans, a suit jacket, and instead of a shirt and tie, I went with a Protect Our Parks t-shirt, which I thought was fitting. And I'm definitely glad I went that route because a lot of people did not dress up. Although there were a couple that did go with suits, and he shouted them out. He was like, "Hey, you got the memo." And it filmed at this theater called The Box in NYC, which we found out is a burlesque theater. and the wallpaper all around is just naked people fucking and shit, which was definitely interesting. The layout of the theater was pretty cool though. We got a booth right next to the stage, which I was hype about, because I was like, we're definitely coming out in this special, because the way we were sitting on the left side of the stage, slightly behind the comedians, it's like the cameras are pointing at them, so they would have to pick us up in the background, but we'll see. And we just had a really good time. It was a funny show. I got to see comedians that I know and that I have followed and listened to their stuff and listened to their respective podcasts. I've checked out their comedy. Got to see Ari, obviously, and the story that he told. Got to see Chris Stefano, which was dope, from the History Hyenas podcast, and obviously a podcast guest on all the major pods. Got to see Steve Simone, which was a real treat for me. I've been a fan of Steve Simone since I heard him initially on the Church of What's Happening Now, Joey Diaz's podcast, I think way back when, and started following and listening to the Good Times podcast with Steve Simone, which I wish he would bring back. It was such a feel good, get you in a good mood podcast, so that was definitely dope to see. And also Sean Patton, which was hilarious as well. It was a great night out, really cool experience. I loved going out and being able to support Ari, in the climax of this story of this essentially stolen storytelling show that was taken away from him that definitely shouldn't have been. So to be able to go support the other side of that, and just, the ideology behind, sticking to your guns, supporting your art, standing behind your word, all that good stuff. I definitely appreciate the opportunity to being able to do so, as well as having just a very nice night out, funny night out with the missus. It's a dope experience. So shout out to Ari Shaffir's final storytelling show. I'll definitely speak to it more once it's the final product that folks can purchase and consume. When that comes out, I'll definitely speak to that. New York City's mayoral elections. Election day is Tuesday, June 24th, 2025. Although early voting is already open. I'm actually probably going to go vote tomorrow, which is a Sunday, which is not something I ever took advantage of before. I did it once before, actually. But prior to then, I would always wait for election day, because I don't know, I just wasn't informed enough of the whole early voting process. And it's simple as shit. There's literally nothing to it. It's not when we had to request ballots and fill out forms to request ballots during COVID or something like that. You had to fill out forms, send them in, and if they were incorrect, they would send them back and say you couldn't get a ballot and you had to do it within a certain time frame, and then you could get the ballot through mail, then you had to mail it back. It's not that. It's literally, you can go in to vote the same way you would on Tuesday, June 24th, 2025, on election day. The same way you go to your polling site to vote, you have a different polling site for early voting. Each district is different, so it's likely not going to be the same place where you go to vote normally. But you just look up your polling site or your early voting polling site the same way you would your polling site from election day, and you just walk in and vote like you normally do on election day. It's literally that simple, and it's open for like a week or more. And I don't think that's highlighted enough, because the whole narrative of how hard it is to vote, and voting should be a national holiday, which it probably should be. But we should also highlight the fact that early voting is open for a week plus, and you could do it the same exact way, much more conveniently. Pick the day of your choosing, weekends, different hours, so on and so forth. Anyway, I digress. So the mayoral election this year is likely coming down to two candidates: former Governor Andrew Cuomo and current state assemblyman Zoran Mamdani. Andrew Cuomo, which is your status quo Democratic candidate, and Zoran Mamdani, which is more of the social democrat vein. So think of Bernie Sanders, AOC, which, if I'm not mistaken, he has both their endorsements. Now, recent polls have them pretty neck and neck. Mamdani has cut the lead that Cuomo has had since he stepped into the race substantially. I've seen them project his chances as 48 to 50%, or 47 to 48, 50, 48, 52, 47, 53, 49, 51. So neck and neck, essentially. But realistically, Cuomo's probably gonna move on with the election. And honestly, when he entered the race, when he announced that he was gonna run for mayor, he had my vote, I feel like, instantly. Not I feel like, I said, yeah, that's what I'm voting for mayor. Like, knowing nothing about the race, my knee-jerk reaction, because I liked Cuomo as a governor. I thought he was a good governor, not completely informed, but just his leadership ability, especially throughout the pandemic, when the whole world was, what the fuck is Trump doing? And everyone was looking to Cuomo for leadership, for those daily press briefings, so on and so forth. It was like, this guy should be president. This guy is going to be the next president. Let's just start listening to him from now. Then he made a few bad moves with the whole scandal with old folks, retirement homes, and how he sent took sick people that were in hospitals with COVID out of them into the nursing homes and exacerbated the deaths there. Then, of course, the sexual misconduct allegations, which part of me takes or took with a grain of salt, because I think too many folks got swept up, kind of like a la Aziz Ansari, with the bad dates or a wink or an asking for a number type of thing gets equated to rape. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many layers in between. But also, where there's smoke, there's fire. So there is that, of course. And it was such a scandal that he had to step down from being governor. I think I did a piece when that happened of like his fall from grace, if you guys want to go back and listen to that. But still, he did have my vote initially. And as time has gone on, and I've watched the debates, listened to where each candidate stands or says that they stand, because again, we're dealing with politicians here, he lost it. He lost my vote. Cuomo did. At the top of the list of reasons why is, I think he's completely wrong on the genocide in Gaza. I think the stranglehold that lobbyists, AIPAC, has on our politicians is disgusting, especially local politicians. It kind of makes more sense at the federal level, but for local politicians and New York City mayor, you control 5 boroughs, for the timeline of how soon you will travel to Israel to become such a headline narrative for candidates for New York City mayor is just bonkers to me. And I liked Mamdani's response to that when everybody was bullshitting, saying, oh yeah, I'm going to go to Israel first chance I get. He was like, yeah, I'm going to stay here in New York and work on New York. That's what I'm running for. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially his response, and to me just was akin to Nas's bar from Rule on the Stillmatic album when he says, how can the president fix up the problems when he can't fix home yet? Or when he ain't fixed home yet? And that's speaking to the president. I'm talking about local politics. New York City mayor. So it's just like that times a million, but I digress. Now, I don't like, on the Mamdani side, the defund the police ideas that he's flirted with or spoken to in the past, which I feel tempered a bit, but not enough. My whole thought process, and I've mentioned this ad nauseum on the podcast, just with the policing epidemic in the country, or lack thereof, is that cops don't need to be defunded. They need to be funded more. They need to be properly trained. They need to be held to higher standards. You need more funding for cops so you can have better cops and not piece of shit cops that should never have the honor of wearing a badge and having a gun, who don't have the mental fortitude to do so. I want cops to be Navy SEAL level motherfuckers, not the I couldn't get a job doing anything else, so let me go become a cop type of folks that we wind up with because they're underpaid, because they're overworked. And something from his perspective of how he's reframing the defund to police narrative around him is that, which I can get on board with, this piece of it, which is creating a Department of Community Safety, which focuses specifically and solely on homeless, mental health issues, guns, and that in doing so, that will off the bat reduce the number of calls police take in daily by 20% and frees them up to focus on the response time of crimes that they actually signed up for. The violent crimes that cops, the brave men and women that are police officers, sign up knowing that they could do. But what they don't sign up for is having to deal with mental health issues, dealing with homeless folks on the train. And if successful, that Department of Community Safety could help mitigate that. And I understand the thought process behind, freeing cops up to focus on other levels of crime. But I would just want to underscore that takes more money, more funding, and also doesn't solve the overall problem, because it would take the more money and more funding just to create that Department of Community Safety. And you still need more money and more funding to raise the bar, raise the level of police officer that remain, not just lower the workload. He also has an idea for making buses throughout the city fast and free. He did a pilot program with one bus line within his assembly district, which apparently worked. And he explained in different interviews how that ultimately gets paid for. Thought that was interesting. And I really like this piece of his platform where he speaks to simplifying the small business opening process. You know, small businesses are the backbone of most communities, especially in New York. And he plans to appoint a mom and pop czar in the city and having them focus on that, cutting the red tape, the bureaucracy that folks have to go through to open up a small business, and, you know, having to go to 7 different agencies to get different permits and licenses, this and that, and just streamlining that process. I also like that he's young, he's ambitious, he's different. And I was listening to a podcast, the Laughing Out Loud podcast with Rachel La Loca, where she had the current Brooklyn Borough president on, Antonio Reynoso, which I've met a few times. And he said something that definitely resonated with me, which is that we tend as New Yorkers, and probably most folks, but just speaking to New Yorkers, to vote for the devil that we know versus the devil that we don't know, which is why we keep electing the same public officials over and over and over again. You know, the devil that we know, the name that we know. Yet we want this massive change and shift in culture and society, or at least we say we do. And I was like, damn, that's true, right? Like, if you look at the landscape of all city, or not all, but most sitting politicians within our local politics within New York, I've seen the same names since well over a decade, maybe even 2 decades, since I've started more, you know, paying closer attention to local politics, and the same names are still floating around, just within different positions. So with that said, my vote is going to Zoran Mamdani, and there is a ranked choice voting system for this election. So you get to cast more than one vote. So you get to cast who your first pick is, your second pick, your third pick, so on and so forth. And my number 1 is going to Zoran. My number 2 is going to Adrian Adams, which is the current city council speaker. Then I have a 3, 4, and 5. My number 3, I'm not set on yet. Maybe Lander, but I'm mainly focused on those top 2. And by the way, I'll still caveat that, as hypocritical as this will sound, with saying that if Cuomo ran for president in, 28, and kind of tempered his, you know, gung-ho approach, seemingly, for supporting what's going on with the Israel-Gaza conflict, and also took inventory of and showed some accountability for what happened during the COVID crisis, which I think nobody would blame him for. And I spoke to this when I did the breakdown of his quote-unquote fall from grace. But he had this moment on Bill Maher over a year ago where they asked him if he had any regrets during that time period. And he was like, no, did everything exactly as I should have, do it the same way again. And it's kind of like, come on, with everything we know now, and everybody would have given him a pass also, because nobody knew what the fuck was going on. And it was like, fuck, I made a bad decision. Just own it. Have the character to own it. Unless you really do feel that you did nothing wrong, in which case then you're blinded by something. Because in retrospect, with knowing for a fact, unrefutably now, that there were many bad moves made during that entire crisis, not just by Cuomo, but across the board, from the massive lockdowns, from masks that didn't work, and social distancing that didn't work, and vaccines which did injure some people, and the lab leak theory that was demonized as being conspiracy theory, which is now New York Times front page proven fact. It's like, come on, it's okay to admit when you're wrong. And it's the character, that's what you can rely on when nobody's looking. Someone's character, which is why Donald Trump is such a piece of shit. But anyway, I just wanted to close out with saying that these are some good ideas that I heard within the debate from different candidates that I just wanted to highlight, which would be dope if whoever is the mayor-elect implements into their platform. One idea from Miss Ramos, which has since dropped out of the race and backed Andrew Cuomo, was raising the minimum wage, which, is a common one that we hear, but tying it to inflation, I thought was key. I thought was genius. I hadn't heard that before, so if other folks have, ran on that, my apologies, but tying it to inflation is key because, inflation is a constant that's always, in theory going up and down, but always going in effect, always going up. And it always feels from a consumer perspective that, shit is just getting more expensive or things are never changing, because when we get raises at work and it's like, the 2 or 3% or whatever it is, it's on par with inflation. So it kind of evens out and then prices go up. So it's like we get fucked. So I like that idea of tying it to inflation at least, not just raising it to some arbitrary number. Mr. Myrie, he wants to have universal after school from ages 3, so 3K, through grade 12, which I think is an awesome idea. Give kids something to do and, they'll be less inclined to be doing fuck shit in the street. Also, extend pre-K and 3K from 2:30 to 6 p.m., which is key because if you're a parent, as I am, you have to have a pretty unique situation, I think, where you either have the grandparents of the kids close by, depending on the type of job you have, the grandparents of the kids close by to be able to pick them up from school while you're at work, or you have to have a job where you're lucky enough to work from home on certain days and then balance that with your spouse, if you have one, to be able to pick up your kid at 2:30, because jobs don't end at 2:30 typically. Most folks are working through to like 5:30, and extending that to 6 p.m. solves for that very common issue that folks are having. And another dope idea, which came from Mr. Blake, was a vacant apartment tax for folks that are not living in New York City. Now, this ties to the idea of how foreign oligarchs, Russians, Chinese, so on and so forth, they buy these penthouse apartments for millions and tens of millions of dollars in New York City, for example, because the real estate is so expensive per square footage. It's a way for them to launder money, essentially. And these apartments are completely vacant. And not necessarily laundering money, although wouldn't put it past them, but it's a store of capital, and nobody from the city is benefiting from that. So a vacant apartment tax for those not living in NYC, I think that's a good idea. Let me know in the comments, who are you voting for this New York City mayoral election of 2025? Don't forget to vote. Election day is Tuesday, June 24th, 2025. This episode's installment of Goats Doing Goat Shit goes to none other than Sinners writer-director Ryan Coogler. Big shout out to Ryan Coogler. And it has to do with his deal with Warner Brothers around this movie. Now, this deal, which I'll break down the 3 key aspects of in a bit, has been labeled as a paradigm shift, unprecedented, groundbreaking, and one of the most important takeaways for me, which consequently highlights a humble characteristic that I appreciate about Ryan Coogler, is that on Democracy Now!, he said that this is not a groundbreaking deal at all. It's not novel. It exists and it has existed. And he knows this just by being in the industry. He knows what's available to his peers. And he says that directors like a Tarantino, a Scorsese, a Spielberg, etc., they often get these deals. And he alluded to it, being made such a big deal of because he happens to be a black director. Now, but the reason why it was highlighted so much, and the 3 main components of this deal, which he negotiated or his team negotiated on his behalf, and that he, as a writer-director, warrants that negotiation even being possible, is number 1, complete creative control, aka final cut privilege, which means essentially from a creative perspective, he's the final decision maker of what you see on screen. Deal point number 2, royalties from day one, also known as first dollar gross participation, which means that he will earn a share of the box office revenue from the start, from day one, not after, which is the more likely scenario, the more common scenario rather, not just after the studio recoups all of its costs. So normally the studio put up all this money to make this film and then say, you know, even if the director happened to get back-end points, they would only kick in after the studio recoups all of its money. After we get paid our $100 million for everything we put into it, or $200 million, whatever it is, after, you know, marketing costs and stuff like that, then we'll start paying you, you know, X percentage of whatever the film makes after then, which most films probably never even get to. But in this deal, from day one, the studio's making money, Ryan's making money. And deal point number 3, and most importantly, in my opinion, is the ownership rights of the film revert back to Ryan Coogler in 25 years. So he's essentially licensing this film to the studio for 25 years. Now that sounds like a long time, and it is a long time. I would like to see that number of that type of deal go down, maybe to 15 years, 20 years, 10 years. But I think back now of movies that I still love to this day, and it's like, fuck, that shit came out 30. It's the what? The 35th anniversary of fucking Back to the Future. What? You know, Star Wars, the Goonies came out 25 years ago. What? And it's like, with that ownership reverting back, that's an asset that you pass down to your family, to your kids, to future generations, which is dope, instead of just signing that away forever. And the studio execs, family and kids, eat from that forever. You know what I mean? Like, you created it, keep it, it's yours. And the deal is seen as a significant win, regardless, for Ryan Coogler, because it's reflecting his commitment to ownership and creative control over his work, particularly given that the film, one of the film's themes is Black ownership and agency. And it's definitely seen as a potential model for other filmmakers and creatives seeking to exert more control over their projects. So definitely shout out to Ryan Coogler, and welcome to the Spun Today Goats Doing Goat Shit list. And that, folks, was episode 285 of the Spun Today podcast. Thank you very much for taking the time to rock out with me and to listen to this episode. I really appreciate each and every one of you who take the time to listen. Please stick around so I can tell you about a few cool ways that you can help support this show if you so choose. And I'll check you out next time. Peace. What's up, folks? Tony here. I hope you're enjoying the Spun Today podcast as much as I enjoy producing it for you. Here are a few ways you can help support the show. You can support the Spun Today podcast financially by going to spuntoday.com/support. There you will find a couple different ways that you can do just that, some of which will actually not even cost you a dime, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. When you go to spuntoday.com/support, you'll see my affiliate link to Amazon. Click on it and it will take you to Amazon's website, where you can do your shopping like normal. This will not cost you anything extra, but Amazon will pay me for driving traffic to their website. If you'd like to support the podcast more directly, you can do so by becoming a patron at spuntoday.com/support. You'll also find my Patreon link. This is where creators such as myself can be paid directly by patrons like you. You can either make a one-time donation or schedule recurring donations if you so choose. There are also different tiers of support, and depending on which you decide to go with, you'll also receive some perks in return, such as early access to content, free digital copies of my books, free bookmarks, etc. That is, again, by supporting via my Patreon link, available at spuntoday.com/support. Similar to Patreon, at that same location, you'll also find my Ko-fi link as well as my Buy Me a Coffee link. They work very similar to Patreon and are different ways that you can help support the show financially. And last but certainly not least, you have the good old-fashioned PayPal donation button. Any which way that you choose to support is greatly appreciated. It all helps me do more of what I love, which is writing and podcasting. Again, go to spuntoday.com/support. You can also support the Spun Today podcast by rating and reviewing the show wherever it is that you're listening to this episode. I'd really appreciate it because it really does help. Also, follow me on all socials. At Spun Today on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Spun Today on Instagram, and at Spun Today on YouTube, where you'll not only find full-length episodes of the podcast, but also chopped up clips and additional content. And of course, you can follow the Facebook page at facebook.com/Spun Today. Another way you can help support the Spun Today podcast and also upgrade that stale wardrobe of yours is by going to spuntoday.com/support and clicking on the banner for Stitch Fix. Once you do, you'll enjoy a $25 discount to your first purchase. And the way Stitch Fix works is pretty cool. I use it and I've never been disappointed. You'll set up a profile, you'll put in all the sizes for your clothes, as well as all the different brands and types of clothes that you like to wear. It's really simple and intuitive to set up. They'll show you pictures and pretty much give you a thumbs up or thumbs down option on if you would wear something or not. And you get to select all the brands that you already are used to wearing. With this information, there are thousands of passionate, trend-setting stylists who will curate a Stitch Fix box for you. They'll send you 5 items that you get to preview before they mail it to you, and you'll get to select based on the image if you like it or not. If not, they'll replace it with something else, and if so, they'll mail it to you absolutely for free. You can try everything on, and you have a few days to send everything back or keep the stuff that you want to keep. Then you can use that $25 credit that I mentioned towards your purchase of those items. Again, to freshen up your wardrobe and also support the Spun Today podcast, go to spuntoday.com/support and click on my affiliate link banner for Stitch Fix and enjoy your $25 credit. Do you want to start your own podcast? Have a great show idea that you want to get out into the masses but don't know quite how to get it from your head out into the world? Well, here's how. Use the podcast host Libsyn. That's who I use to bring the Spun Today podcast to you. And now you can use them the same way. Using the promo code SPUN, S-P-U-N, you can open up your Libsyn account today and get 2 months of free podcast hosting. Here's how it works. Once you record your show, you upload it to your Libsyn account, where you can fill in your episode notes, upload your podcast art, and schedule when you want your episodes to release. Once you do that, Libsyn will take care of the rest. They'll distribute your show to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all the other podcatchers that you choose, instantaneously and seamlessly. Again, go to libsyn.com and use the promo code SPUN, S-P-U-N, to get 2 months free. Or use the affiliate link that's in the episode notes. Again, that's libsyn.com, promo code SPUN. Take that great podcast idea from out of your head and put it out into the world. And as always, folks, substitute the mysticism with hard work and start taking steps in the general direction of your dreams. Thanks for listening. I love you, Aiden.
I love you, Daddy.
I love you, Grayson.
I love you, Daddy.